when we learned last week, obviously like all of you in her book, that she killed her puppy, you heard me say that was very, very sad. We find her comments from yesterday disturbing. We find them absurd. And here, this is a country that loves dogs.
Okay, so Kristi Noem, who is a Republican governor and at least rumored to be in consideration for Trump's vice presidential running mate, just published a book. And in her book, she relates a story about shooting her family dog with a gun because she didn't like the dog. She said she took him out to a gravel pit and shot him. And there's a lot of outrage on the internet about this story, particularly from leftists who are calling her loony for having killed her family dog. And I think there's a valid argument to be made that this is a distasteful thing to do, a weird thing to do. But here's the thing. This outrage that we're hearing from leftists about how crazy it is, how horrible it is that Kristi Noem shot her dog, where is the same outrage when almost 1 million times a year here in the United States, unborn boys and girls, this is human beings, not dogs, are suffocated, dismembered, their skulls are crushed, and they are killed in the womb.
Welcome to my channel, Outspoken Samantha. If you are new here, welcome. I appreciate you clicking on the video to watch it, and I would love it if you would also hit that subscribe button. And if you're returning, welcome back. I truly do appreciate your continued support on my channel, and I hope that you are subscribed as well. So guys, let's talk about Governor Kristi Noem and what has been going on with her lately, because it has been an absolute poop show. So I think most of us came to know who Governor Noem was during the 2020 COVID pandemic, particularly after a couple months of dealing with the situation, dealing with the virus, figuring out what the severity level of it was, and then each state started to determine what policies made sense in moving forward. And while there were numerous Democrat governors who decided that crippling the economy and destroying people's lives and essentially ruling their states with an iron fist was the only way to address an illness that was not particularly threatening to like 99% of people, Governor Noem stood out as someone who took a balanced, sane, logical, and science-based approach to the situation. And of course, she was met with backlash, again, primarily from Democrats, who accused anyone who didn't mask up or vax up or who didn't hide away entirely of wanting to kill grandma, even though their policies made it so that grandma couldn't get the healthcare, prescriptions, or human connection from their loved ones that are actually the things that are needed for their survival and for their ability to thrive. So Kristi Noem went from being this never before heard of governor of South Dakota to something of a celebrity because she refused to be completely insane and refused to bow down to the mob. And she did set an example of what it looks like to stand up for what's right, even in the face of these snarling, groveling activists who tend to resort to screaming and name-calling as a way to get good people to cave to their insane, depraved demands. And I know that myself and many others appreciated her for that. And I think we can say that Governor Ron DeSantis stood in that same camp. And then there was Governor Abbott, who kind of put his foot in that camp for the most part, though he was more wishy-washy on these things than most Texans probably would have liked. Since then, the celebrity status around Governor Noem has died down quite a bit as the COVID dust has settled. And now we're just back to the regular stand against these mob activists who want to do things like mutilate children and erase the existence of women and pretend that there aren't hundreds of thousands of people dying every year from fentanyl exposure as a result of our open borders, or that terrorists and criminals aren't flooding into the country at an unprecedented rate, and that our communities are not considerably more in danger and less stable because all of the resources that are actually meant to help our own people who are struggling are now going to the millions of illegal immigrants who have taken over some of our largest cities while our own people's suffering is ignored and belittled. And Kristi Noem has been strong on these issues as well. And because of all that, there has been a rumor circulating, though I don't know how much legitimacy there was to it, that she might be on the list of possibilities of VP on the presidential ticket next to Trump. And I think most people would have been on board with that had it not been for her book that she released recently that had some pretty concerning content. So I'm sure, as most of you are aware by now, the major issue with this book came out as she told a story about having to shoot one of their family dogs, and this is something that happened about 20 years ago. The story involved their 14-month-old puppy named Cricket, who was apparently meant to be a hunting dog, but Noem grew frustrated with the dog after the dog demonstrated little ability or interest, at least according to her, in hunting pheasant, and instead chose to target their neighbor's chickens. So some of you may have already heard the story, but just in case you haven't, this is the article from The Guardian, and it has the most direct content from the book, as far as I can tell, so I will just tell it really quickly. So she says, Cricket was a wire hair pointer, about 14 months old, the South Dakota governor writes in a new book, adding that the dog, a female, had an aggressive personality and needed to be trained to be used for hunting pheasant. So in this book, she includes her story about the ill-fated Cricket, she says, to illustrate her willingness in politics as well as in South Dakota life to do anything difficult, messy, and ugly if it simply needs to be done. By taking Cricket on a pheasant hunt with older dogs, Noem says she hoped to calm the young dog down and begin to teach her how to behave. Unfortunately, Cricket ruined the hunt, going out of her mind with excitement, chasing all those birds and having the time of her life. Noem describes calling Cricket, then using an electronic collar to attempt to bring her under control. Nothing worked. Then, on the way home after the hunt, as Noem stopped to talk to a local family, Cricket escaped Noem's truck and attacked the family's chickens, grabbing one chicken at a time, crunching it to death with one bite, then dropping it to attack another. Cricket, the untrainable dog, Noem writes, behaved like a trained assassin. When Noem finally grabbed Cricket, she says, the dog whipped around to bite me. Then, as the chicken's owner wept, Noem repeatedly apologized, wrote the shocked family a check for the price they asked, and helped them to dispose of the carcasses littering the scene of the crime. Through it all, Noem says Cricket was the picture of pure joy. I hated that dog, Noem writes, adding that Cricket had proved herself untrainable, dangerous to anyone she came in contact with, and less than worthless as a hunting dog. At that moment, Noem says, I realized I had to put her down. Noem, who also represented her state in Congress for 8 years, got her gun, then led Cricket to a gravel pit. It was not a pleasant job, she writes, but it had to be done, and after it was over, I realized another unpleasant job needed to be done. She goes on to talk about a goat that the family also owned that she claims was also a nuisance to her children as it would attack them and knock them over and ruin their clothes, and this goat met the same fate as poor Cricket. So that was obviously the story that got everybody riled up, and I have to say, I am not a dog person. I do like dogs, and I might actually want to own a dog someday, but I like dogs particularly when they're other people's dogs, and I don't have to put in the work to care for them, because if I'm going to put my time and energy into raising living beings, my preference is children. That being said, there are very, very, very few instances where I think that putting a dog down in this way is appropriate. Most of those instances would be the stories that we hear of these aggressive dogs actually like physically attacking a child or a person, the ones that we see of human beings actually being mauled to death, and where it is actually necessary to stop the dog by putting it to death very quickly. Like, that is about the only situation that I can see where that is necessary. So I do not see in any way where this particular circumstance would meet that criteria. Because as she said in the story, she says the dog was happy, full of joy, thinking that they had just accomplished this great thing. And she even goes on to say that after it had all happened, her kids were wondering where the dog was, which doesn't seem like a question that they would ask if these kids were actually in fear of this animal. And what's even more astonishing about this story is that it seems to be the one issue over the last who knows how long that both Democrats and Republicans have been united on. It's this particularly horrifying story about poor Cricket. And since then, I know that she is trying to recover from this, but she has gone on to defend herself during several interviews, and I truly do not think that she is making the situation any better, and I don't know what the answer is to recover from a story like that, perhaps just to stop talking about it or stop doing interviews about it. I don't know, but she's not helping herself.
Well, Sean, you know how the fake news works. They leave out some or most of the facts of a story. They put the worst spin on it. And that's what's happened in this case. I hope people really do buy this book and they find out the truth of this story, because the truth of this story is that this was a working dog and it was not a puppy. It was a dog that was extremely dangerous. It had come to us from a family who had found her way too aggressive. We were her second chance, and the day she was put down was a day that she massacred livestock that were part of our neighbors. She attacked me, and it was a hard decision. And the reason it's in the book is because this book is filled with tough, challenging decisions that I've had to make throughout my life. And I hope that people understand from this that what the point of this story is that most politicians, they will run from the truth. They will shy away and hide from making tough decisions. I don't do either of those.
And I understand what she's saying here, but at the same time, it just seems like an unnecessary decision. I mean, put the dog in a shelter. When you give it to the shelter, advise the shelter that the dog is in need of training, that it's not particularly safe with other animals, and that whoever adopts Cricket needs to be prepared to put the time and energy into correcting these behaviors. There just seems like there were so many other options that this doesn't make sense. And what makes even less sense is why you would put this in a book, because this is not the message that you are portraying to people. I mean, she's saying that it was to demonstrate her ability to make tough decisions and show that she's not one to shy away from making hard calls, even when these calls are unpopular. But to me, this is not a show of strength. In fact, it shows that you make rash decisions when you're angry and stressed, which are the opposite qualities that we want in leadership. And never in the history of people who have killed animals, particularly pets, because when it comes to things like cats and dogs and bunnies and guinea pigs, these are the pets, these are the animals that we get as pets to comfort us. They become like family members, even though I think it's extremely weird when people call them fur babies or regard them at a level as a human child or compare having a dog to having a kid, because those are not the same things at all. I do think that we have elevated animals to a higher level than what they should be, but that is a whole other rant. But we're talking about cats, dogs, things like that. We're not talking about chickens and cows and animals that we know people particularly raise for the purpose of food and providing different things to society. There is a different level. So never in the history of killing things like family pets has anyone ever said that this shows dedication and an ability to problem solve or make tough decisions. Every single time that we have ever heard of these things, these are the things that we associate with psychopaths and serial killers. But I do have to say, it's not that I think Kristi Noem is a psychopath or a serial killer. I really don't think that at all. I think that this was a very severe error in judgment, and one that she's not going to be able to come back from, in my opinion. And before I go into some of the other ways that Kristi Noem has managed to effectively end her political career just over the last few days, I do want to say first, again, that yes, shooting a dog is horrifying and generally 99.9% of the time completely unnecessary, and I do think that this situation falls into that category. There are at least like 9,567 other issues going on both culturally and politically that deserve the level of outrage, if not more so, than the death of a dog that happened like 20 years ago. We're talking about child mutilation, the sexualization of children, open borders, numerous wars going on, inflation, gas prices, and the fact that KJP just went in the White House press room and lied about crime being at a 50-year low in places like Los Angeles and New York, which takes a truly sociopathic, psychopathic, narcissistic level of inhumanity to even say that, because you have to actively and intentionally ignore the absolute horror that human beings, actual human beings, are living through on a daily basis and not care about the suffering of millions of people to make a statement like that. Not to mention the fact that Democrats want abortion up to birth, any stage of pregnancy for any reason, no questions asked, and to deny medical care to babies born alive from failed abortions. Not defending what Kristi Noem did, but just calling out the blatant and undeniable morally bankrupt list of priorities that too much of society has right now. After all of that, Noem has now been under fire for another passage in her book, which she claims has been removed, but was initially included, which at least heavily insinuated that she had met with Jong Un, the leader of North Korea.
Talk about meeting some world leaders, and one specific one. Quote, "I remember when I met with North Korean dictator Jong Un, I'm sure he underestimated me, having no clue about my experience staring down little tyrants. I've been a children's pastor after all." Did you meet Jong Un?
Well, you know, as soon as this was brought to my attention, I certainly made some changes and looked at this passage. And I've met with many, many world leaders. I've traveled around the world. As soon as it was brought to my attention, we went forward and have made some edits. So I'm glad that this book is being released in a couple of days, and that those edits will be in place, and that people will have the updated version.
So you did not meet with Kim Jong Un. That's what you're saying.
You know, I've met with many, many world leaders. I've traveled around the world. I think I've talked extensively in this book about my time serving in Congress, my time as governor, before governor, some of the travels that I've had. I'm not going to talk about my specific meetings with world leaders. I'm just not going to do that. This anecdote shouldn't have been in the book, and as soon as it was brought to my attention, I made sure that that was adjusted.
I thought it was an interesting choice of words to say when this was brought to my attention, because I understand that in the process of writing these books, you know, they provide the content and then someone else actually puts it all together and writes it out. But they wouldn't have had this story to include if you had not provided it to them. You're either blaming the person that wrote the book for you for putting in a story that is not true, or you yourself lied about it. Dodging the question is only making things worse. Going on about how you have met with world leaders or how long you've been in politics doesn't distract from what people actually want to know.
Me for it, Jesse.
Yeah, they are. So they're also attacking you. I guess you said you met Kim Jong Un. Did you meet him?
I've been to the DMZ. I've been to North Korea. You know, I don't talk about my conversations with world leaders. And so when I looked at the book and I saw that excerpt, I decided to make the change to the content of the book, and that's been done.
So you didn't have a conversation with Kim when you were at the DMZ?
I don't have conversations about my conversations with world leaders. I've been working on policy for 30 years, Jesse, and that's what most people don't remember about me is I'm old. I'm a mom, I'm a grandma. I've got 3 little grandbabies.
You're not that old. So maybe you did have a conversation with Kim, but you don't want to talk about it.
I will not talk about my personal.
And she may have come face to face with Kim Jong Un and then decided perhaps it wasn't a good idea to go into detail about it in her book. But honestly, it's interesting that she didn't have that mindset when she decided to include the story about the dog, because if she's trying to achieve this level of respect and strength, then coming face to face with a country leader who has managed to imprison an entire country and maintain almost total secrecy about the lives of millions of people is far more of a demonstration of that strength you want people to see in you and respect that you want them to have for you than shooting your dog. I just have so many questions about this, so you guys can let me know what your thoughts are. Does she have a political career moving forward? Does she have any chance of ever being anybody's pick for anything ever again? Because in my opinion, it really is the dog story that ended it for her. People probably wouldn't have thought much about the North Korea thing had the dog story not been in there, but now nobody, like Republicans, Democrats, Independents, wants to be known as someone who voted for the lady who shoots puppies, and nobody wants to pick a running mate who's known for shooting puppies. But just to close this whole thing out, just to be clear, people on the left do not get to be upset about this issue. As I said before, under this administration, we have unprecedented human trafficking, child exploitation, abortion up to birth, cities buckling under crime and drugs, people living in total desperation by not being able to afford the basic necessities, being viciously attacked and assaulted by criminals who are being let out by Democrat DAs. If you are on the left, you have no morals. You don't care about safety. You don't care about people. I don't even think you care about puppies. You do not have a moral compass. And if the Biden administration came out tomorrow and said that trans people need to kill dogs to survive, or that it was racist to deny people the ability to run over their family pet, all of you would be on board with no questions asked. But again, I do have to say, I do think Kristi Noem's political career is over, but I would love to hear all of your thoughts on this in the comments below. Please be sure to hit that like button. It does help me. I would love it if you would make sure that you are subscribed. Keep it real, guys, and I will see you in the next one.